Welcome everyone to another episode of our podcast AdBites, where we look to lift the lid on all things mobile advertising. This podcast is brought to you by Redbox Mobile, an award-winning app advertiser and app marketing specialist. And I'm your host, Samuel Chorlton. I work at Redbox Mobile, and today I am joined by co-founder and CTO of Singular, Eran Friedman. So welcome, Eran. So today we're going to be talking about SKAN 4 and how the additional data insights that it delivers to app advertisers are enabling better understanding of campaign attribution and user value. Before we jump in, I guess let's kind of take a slight step back. And Eran, if you could start with what is SKAN in the context of, I guess, iOS mobile advertising?
Yeah, sure. So SKAN is an acronym or like a short nickname of SKAN network, which is a framework by Apple in iOS that's its purpose is to provide app developers with attribution data or performance marketing measurement for campaigns that are running across ad network while keeping kind of the user privacy. So essentially providing app developers a way to measure their paid campaigns without the need for any user tracking or any user level information at all. Now, this is kind of, if we talk about like a SKAN network in general, this is kind of an evolving framework or in which Apple basically once in a while, they make changes. They have been investing a lot in like making this framework more and more usable, and it has kind of like versions or like generations basically. And every year we've been basically hearing about more and more features getting added. With SKAN 4.0, we're getting some more features that I'm sure we're going to talk about compared to SKAN 3.0, which is the previous generation that we had. And we did talk about all the kind of new features there, like about postbacks and condition granularity and so forth. But the bottom line is that SKAN network provides aggregated measurement data for your campaigns and without hurting the user's privacy in iOS.
Yeah, so I presume those kind of evolutions is, I guess, fine-tuning that balance between maintaining the user privacy, but what also making it usable in the context of advertising. I know when we've chatted about this, SKAN 4 from SKAN 3 was quite a big shift, quite a big evolution. And I know kind of post-back windows was one of the key elements of it. But yeah, it'd be kind of good to hear how that improvement looks from your side of things.
Right. So so definitely I agree with you. Like the longer postbacks is probably one of the biggest changes in SKAN 4.0. If I try to kind of take again a step back and kind of explain what's the meaning behind it. So SKAN is based on kind of recording or knowing when a user clicked an ad in one app. I'm showing an ad for like an advertised app and having the user kind of get to the App Store, download the app, open it for the first time, do any kind of meaningful events there. That's SKAN network also called conversion values. So basically anything like a purchase or like a registration, sign up and so forth. And then recording that information and sending it via what they call a postback, a signal back to the network on the value of the user. So in previous versions of SKAN, basically in SKAN 3.0, there was a single postback for every user. So if a user would see the ad, click it, open the advertised app, and kind of, like play the game or register for the app, there would be a single opportunity or single chance to record what's the value of the user in an anonymized fashion and send it via that single postback. And there's a huge timer mechanism. How long can you wait until you decide what's the value of the user and so forth. I won't get too much into it now. But one of the biggest limitations that SKAN had was that it's just one chance, one postback, and a very short-term window of opportunity to record that value of the user. Just to simplify, the standard was that SKAN provides is up to 24 hours. So again, in the previous generation of SKAN, you only had 24 hours from the first open of the game or of the app to understand what's the value of the user, and encode kind of the response to the network saying, okay, if this user is valuable. And of course, many apps, services, games, and so forth, for 24 hours wasn't really long enough to really understand that value. So what happened in SKAN 4.0 is Apple apparently kind of listened to the feedback and kind of provide new features, new capabilities in SKAN 4.0 to do two things. First of all, they've increased the number of postbacks to 3 postbacks instead of just 1, meaning you have 3 different opportunities to decide what's the most updated value of the user and send it to the network. And number 2, it's with longer periods of time. So before, if there was a single postback for just like 24 hours, again, just to simplify, it's kind of the standard. Now they've set specific time windows for each postback. So the first postback is sent after 2 days or recorded after 2 days. The second postback is recorded after 7 days, basically a week after the app was open for the first time. And the third postback is decided after 35 days. That's kind of the longest postback. So essentially it means that you have 2 days, 7 days, and basically a month, more than a month, to decide what's the value of the user and send multiple of those signals to the network. Mm-hmm. So first of all, you can understand it's a big change. I know, okay, we're talking about like multiple signals, multiple windows and all of that. And also a lot more signal in a sense for the network to be able to optimize and for you to see basically those results.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a kind of massive change, really. I guess one of the bits that I've kind of not clear on in my head is obviously the kind of the core rationale behind this is maintaining that user anonymity. Yep. The core target for advertisers is to understand individuals or groups of people that provide the best return on investment. How does that get reflected alongside those kind of anonymity levels?
Right. You're exactly right. It's kind of, there's a bit of a trade-off that Apple, I think, is very aware of, that on the one hand, marketers want to, get as much granular information, right? As many details about, as small groups as possible of users to understand who are the most valuable for them based on their paid media campaigns. But the trade-off is, as more granular you become, then the more risk it creates to be able to identify or understand more private details about those groups of users, right? So if, just as an example, I started a paid campaign that is extremely targeted, I'm targeting a specific person and kind of I'm getting kind of a post back with like a very specific value, I could potentially have a risk of, from that result, understanding who's that user exactly and what they did, right? So that's basically what Apple is trying to avoid. They want to make sure that they maintain the privacy of the users, but still providing some meaningful information for the marketers who are running those paid campaigns. One of the really interesting concepts that they've actually kind of improved, upgraded, or like made even more advanced in SKAN 4 is what they call the crowd anonymity tiers. Which I think is an elegant design to try to clarify the trade-off between those two things. And basically what they say is the following. The more volume that you have, the more users that you're getting from your campaigns, then the less of a risk to privacy it means if you're getting more information about them, right? So if you're just running a campaign, you're getting just a single install for that specific campaign, they don't want to share too much information about how that campaign is performing, so you won't be able to identify who that person is, right? But if you're getting like 10,000 users from that single campaign, they can probably provide additional information, and it would be extremely difficult for you to understand, okay, which users are you talking about, right? So they created this design of different tiers of volume, saying, it starts from, and they basically designed 4 different tiers. They've outlined it in a very specific way in the documentation, saying in the lowest tier, it's just for the beginners. You're barely getting any volume and the volume of installs. You're not going to get much information about these users. You know that 5 users came from that campaign and that's it. You won't have any details of what they did, what's their value, any granular segment or anything. But the higher the volume that you have as you're increasing in scale, they are more willing to share more information about those users to understand, again, the performance of your campaigns. So after a certain level, let's say about 15 users per day, that's actual thresholds that we've seen based on the data. To be clear, Apple is not disclosing those tiers. Don't say what's the level of volume that you need to get more information. They say it's up to them to decide. But we can obviously see based on the data that we're getting and kind of what's the standard tiers that typically advertisers get. So after roughly around 15 installs per day for a specific campaign, suddenly you're getting a bit more details. You can start getting those conversion values, but they would be very limited ones. Kind of time we're going to talk about like the different types and so forth. So I won't get too much into it, but basically a limited version of it. And if you are starting to increase scale, you're going to get a deeper, more granular type of information about those values. In addition, you're going to get more details about the campaign. You're starting with just what's the campaign name, a single kind of identifier, which is pretty high level. But if you're increasing in scale, they're using what's called a source identifier. They're adding more information about the segment of the user in that specific campaign that the ad network can encode. For example, saying what's the different ad group that the user, that this cohort is coming from, or what's the different specific country that they're coming from, or the specific creative. It all depends on volumes. The more volume that you get, the more granularity you're going to get from that campaign. So that's the entire design of the crowd anonymity tiers. I think it basically means that the idea is for anyone to be able to use SKAN. If you're just beginning, you have barely a budget, or just testing things, you're going to get some limited information, but not too much. But as you scale and you need to become more advanced, you'll get more and more granular information for optimizations.
Yeah, I mean, and that seems like a fair compromise, I think, for kind of maintaining those degrees of anonymity. And yeah, I mean, I guess the language that's used to talk about this is that usually like coarse conversion values and fine-grained, or whatever the language is? What's the kind of, yeah, what's the kind of language around this space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know it can be a bit confusing sometimes of the different terms and all that. So, so let's start with just conversion values in general. Conversion values are the design of assigning for every postback or every kind of user who started using your app for the first time after they came from a paid campaign. What's the value of the user? You need to kind of signal to the network if this is a good user or a bad user, right, for their performance. In SKAN 3, in previous versions, they had a single type of conversion value, like a very specific way to encode the value of the user. And it was basically a number between 0 and 63. So it's like you can look at it. Yeah, it's a very like a specific kind of way to define it. And basically said, you have a number, you can assign the user a specific number. You need to choose between 0 and 63 what it is. And that's what the network was going to get. So for example, the network would get 1,000 users with conversion value of 12, 500 users of conversion value of 36, and so forth, right? Just like a bunch of users and numbers. That was kind of the original term of conversion value. In SKAN 4, they basically made an upgrade that's related to the crowd anonymity tiers. They basically, again, part of the feedback of, part of the, again, design principles is because this number can be used in various ways, they want to, again, protect the privacy of the users and make sure that you can't really use these numbers to try to figure out who those users are, right? Like assign, I don't know, if you're barely getting any users and you're assigning them just to 63, and you know that if it's 63, it means that this user is this person, they want to basically limit that. So they previously had the concept of privacy thresholds, a bit like the crowd anonymity tiers, in which they say if you're low volume, you're not going to get those conversion values anyway, anywhere. Like you're not going to get that number at all. And that meant that many of the small advertisers, when they started kind of their campaigns, they wouldn't get any conversion values. That number was kind of missing, and they couldn't know anything about the performance of these campaigns. So in SKAN 4, Apple tried to, again, play around with the trade-off and assign it with different crowd anonymity tiers. So they decided to create a new type of conversion value, and they called it the coarse conversion value. So they said, if you're just starting, in the beginning, you're not getting any signal, any type of conversion values, but if you just get a bit more volume, let's say, again, those 15 daily installs, you start going to get a coarse conversion value, which is not that number between 0 and 63. It's going to be a more basic version of conversion values, which has only 3 types of values. It's either low, medium, or high. So instead of using numbers, you're using just text. You can decide that this user is a low value user, medium value user, or high value user. So it's a very basic, limited type of information, but it's meaningful enough, right? And basically said, if you have that confidence to increase the spend in your campaign, then in the higher crowd anonymity tier, you're going to get a fine conversion value, which is that number that we just talked about. So now they've termed it as the fine conversion value, which can have more information available. So instead of just that basic low, medium, or high, suddenly you're getting access to that number between 0 and 63. So it allows, again, that level of scale in which at first you're getting nothing. The second level, you're getting that low, medium, high, basic information. And more advanced level, you're getting that fine conversion value, which can be used in various ways.
That's interesting. And I guess actually kind of getting the value out of this data, do clients need to work with an MMP? Is there advantages to working with an MMP? Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to kind of hear about that.
Yeah, sure. So like, I assume that already from kind of all the context I've been explaining, you can probably imagine that this SKAN network or SKAN framework is pretty complicated, right? There's so many technical terms, so many nuances and flows, and I've tried to keep it simple. There are many other kind of complications. Apple, for example, is adding some randomness there, again, to protect the privacy of the user. So you won't get exactly the information that you're intending to. They're sending the postbacks in different periods of time. There's also different types of granularity that you can get. So there's a lot more details that exist in the framework that cause it to be extremely hard to operate on your own, right? So that's kind of one point that obviously a partner, a technology partner that's kind of specializing in the SKAN network can make it much more easier for advertisers to use, right? The other part is the partnerships with the media channels themselves. So the key part when you started using SKAN network is you want to see the results, but you also want to make sure that the networks are able to optimize on those SKAN network results. When, I don't know, like Meta, for example, or TikTok get the conversion value of, I don't know, like basically 57 or medium, they would actually know what is its meaning and would be able to optimize your campaign and get better results for you. So there is a need for basically a mediator in a sense, a technology mediator that first of all translates those values to the network on kind of helping them optimize, and also brings back the results for the advertiser to understand how well they're performing. This is where we believe kind of is a perfect kind of role for the MMPs to provide the technology and kind of that management of all the SKAN network framework, basically using the APIs, managing those conversion values, getting back those postbacks, and essentially trying to abstract all those technical terms and details. So the advertiser doesn't even need to think in terms of those encoded numbers and all the details, and they just get kind of the bottom line. Which campaigns am I running? What are the results? How much revenue I got from these campaigns? What's the ROAS? How many registrations I got from these? Really thinking in like, human terms rather than those encodings of SKAN network. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the key part of the MMPs in this ecosystem.
And I know we touched on very briefly ad networks there, and you gave Meta as an example. Are all of them SKAN4 compliant? Is it still a bit of a mixed bag? What's kind of going on there?
Yeah, so that's a good point. The truth is that the upgrade from 3.0 to 4.0 is pretty much the biggest upgrade that SKAN had in its history ever. And it's not like it exists for that long, basically like 3 or 4 years, but 4.0 has been a big change for all the ad networks in general. And therefore, it's been taking a while to adopt, really to change all their systems to be able to both work with and optimize by SKAN4. So while the MMPs have already been kind of ready for a while now with the support for SKAN4, the ad networks have been taking a while to kind of gradually upgrade towards SKAN4. And there's been kind of interesting kind of approaches and kind of things that we've been seeing in the industry. Some have like I think all of them for sure are working to upgrade to SKAN 4. Some of them have, for example, started beta testing SKAN 4 and have selected advertisers that are already kind of working with and running SKAN 4 campaigns. Others have done like full launches, then kind of we already see that most of their traffic even have arrived to SKAN 4. But again, it's on a network by network level. So it might be a smaller network, for example, with a high penetration of SKAN 4, but in the overall volume of the industry, they're still smaller compared to others. The interesting thing is Singular actually released just like a couple of months ago a SKAN 4 adoption dashboard. So basically we're seeing obviously a lot of SKAN results across the entire ecosystem and our entire customer base and ad network base. And we actually show that real-time updated dashboard publicly available for everyone. You can look for like Singular SKAN 4 dashboard, and you see basically all the networks, their support for SKAN 4 and how many of those postbacks are actually SKAN 4 eligible, right? So you can actually see some have kind of past the 50%, others are still kind of in the beginning stage. You can actually also see that some have actually increased the adoption, then saw some hiccups and kind of rolled back and kind of still working on it. So it's an interesting, very dynamic situation in the industry at the moment. Maybe as kind of as an advice to the advertisers, like if you're wondering, okay, who supports what? Of course, you can check our SKAN 4 dashboard to see kind of the level of support per network. But I would also say that many today have closed beta programs. So those are low volume, low scale, but they definitely enable you to test on those new features today.
And in terms of from the actual app developer perspective, is it a significant development overhead kind of migrating over to SKAN 4, or is it?
So I would say, yes, I would say if you're trying to do it on your own without an MMP, I would say it's a pretty significant overhead of like, you need to think about like all those different nuances. But if you're working with an MMP, or basically our services to provide an out-of-the-box solution for SKAN. So if you're already using SKAN, or even if you're not using SKAN at all, essentially the need is to just use the MMP SDK. So you would use a Singular SDK in your app. And that's it. Like basically that's like requirement from the developer itself. Just use the SDK, or if you're already using SKAN 3, just update it to support SKAN 4. That's all. Then we basically take kind of care of the heavy lifting. So for the marketer, they just have like a full dashboard managing SKAN for them. So they have like the SKAN configuration, they have the SKAN reports, everything in Singular without any additional need for developer time. So we try to make it just as seamless as possible to either implement SKAN or upgrade from SKAN 3 to SKAN 4.
And I guess we've talked a bit about some of the constraints that this kind of anonymity kind of construct influences. Are there kind of just inherent data blind spots in SKAN 4 that app managers need to be aware of then?
So yeah, maybe I would kind of try to split it to two. So generally speaking, if you look at SKAN in general, it's of course very different than kind of user level tracking that you had kind of before kind of the whole privacy changes, right? So before, like in the past, I think part of the big change that Apple introduced in iOS 14.5 was the ATT pop-up, like the app tracking transparency pop-up that requires the user, if you want to track them at the user level, you're required to ask them for consent to start tracking them right across different companies, and the user can either allow tracking or not allow tracking. So sometimes kind of SKAN in general is compared to that, like to the days before ATT, before that pop-up, where you could basically track all users by their IDFA or kind of their identifiers. And I would say that SKAN is definitely different than that, right? SKAN means you don't have any access to user level data. You're getting access to anonymized aggregated data. I wouldn't necessarily call it a data blind spot, but I would say it's a different type of data than the industry has been used to. So that requires a bit kind of getting used to it. But then if I dive a bit deeper, and sometimes I get asked, okay, if there are any blind spots in upgrading to SKAN 4 compared to SKAN 3, right? So okay, so it sounds like SKAN 4 has a great many features. Are there any disadvantages by upgrading to SKAN 4? And I would say generally, there are no disadvantages, roughly speaking, in like upgrading to SKAN 4. SKAN 4 basically, Apple designed to be a better version of SKAN 3, and it's kind of a bit like it's basically backward compatible too. So you're not losing anything by upgrading to SKAN 4, but there are nuances that you need to be aware of. I'll give you another example of a nuance that we've seen some developers that kind of try to do it on their own and kind of they kind of encountered it is in SKAN 3, for example, the conversion values could only go up with time. So if, for example, you would decide that the user is worth, conversion value 5, and then after an hour you say, okay, this user actually is worth conversion, is higher, you can assign conversion value 7, and the conversion value would kind of get updated with time within this window of 24 hours. If you, for example, decide that the user is actually lower in value and they're you want to set it to 3 after that 5, then SKAN would just ignore that setting, right? In SKAN 3, it could only go up, basically, right? So everybody has been used to, anyone who's been kind of in the details, to just assume that it can only go up and that's just the way it is. But in SKAN 4, Apple actually changed that mechanism. Now deciding said it can go up and down. It doesn't matter. There's no limitation like that. So we've discovered, for example, some advertisers who kind of try to manage it on their own, who upgraded on their own to SKAN 4, suddenly actually didn't realize that. I would say, like, here's kind of an interesting story. So some of them are basically reached out to us, said like SKAN 4 is like crazy. Once we've upgraded, suddenly all the conversion values started becoming 0. Once we kind of upgraded, like basically no value to these users. It's like it looks like a complete mess. And once we kind of dived into those apps and tried to figure out what's going on, we realized that they had kind of a piece of code previously who was just keep setting conversion values to 0. But in SKAN 3, Apple was basically ignoring it, right? Because conversion values could only go up. So even though they had a hidden bug that was supposed to reset those values, it was in SKAN 3, everything worked exactly as they expected. But suddenly, once they've upgraded to SKAN 4, it completely demolished their performance. Because suddenly, it's making an effect and it's resetting all their users. So if you don't know the nuance, basically, it might become a data blind spot, right? You're upgrading and everything looks terrible, but it's all about understanding the details of what's going on. Obviously, you shouldn't just reset those values to 0 now in SKAN 4. So it's just being aware of all those details to make sure that everything works well. But as long, again, if you work with kind of a technology partner to manage it for you, then our goal is for you to not care about those details, just kind of get the bottom line. And I think from a high level perspective, SKAN 4 is definitely a better version, I would say, than SKAN 3. There's no downside in upgrading, generally speaking.
So I guess, from the sounds of things, that's pretty much kind of one of your kind of firm recommendations is, as much as possible, upgrade to the latest version of SKAN, I guess, in that instance. I guess within Singular, was that just a process of upgrading to a new version of the library or whatever, and therefore you became automatically compliant with SKAN 4 in that case?
I would say that for the developer that's using Singular, it's that simple, right? They just upgrade the version with Singular's SDK, that's it, they're done. But for us, it was obviously a bit more heavy lifting because we need to support all those different nuances, right? So the new types of conversion values, the crowd and limited tiers, the different types of postbacks, the longer postbacks. So a lot more details. Like it was like a pretty heavy project for us, and it's still evolving with the different ad networks who kind of adding the support and have different requirements. But so I would say for the MMP side, it is like a big was a big initiative. For the developers, because we've invested so much, I would say it's much more seamless for them.
So I guess, yeah, I mean, we know at the WWDC this year, Apple started to hint at SKAN 5 or whatever it's going to be termed. Yeah, I guess what's your take on what's been announced, rumored, whatever so far?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it was one of the surprises in the last WWDC because just a year ago, they've announced SKAN 4 and released, and actually they announced it like a bit in advance. They actually released SKAN 4 in iOS 16.1, which was around November of last year. So we didn't even pass a full year since the release of SKAN 4. And it has been such a massive change that most ad networks don't have like full support for SKAN4, right? They're still gradually releasing it. So I think nobody expected much to already hear about SKAN version 5.0 that was announced in WWDC just this year. And so just to kind of recap, so Apple announced that now SKAN 5 is coming out. They didn't release it yet. It's a bit like last year. They announced that it's coming and will be available later this year. So we're getting close to the end of the year, so somewhere in the next few months, probably. Again, probably pretty similar to SKAN 4. And it took everyone a bit by surprise because SKAN 4 was such a massive change. It's still getting requires time to upgrade to, and we already have SKAN 5 coming up. I think the positive side is it's definitely clear that Apple continues to invest in that framework. So it's kind of seems like a key pillar in their strategy, and we should probably expect to hear about version 6 and 7 and 8 maybe kind of in the long term. But I think that's the good news, right? So anyone who's investing in SKAN, it's good to know that we can expect more and more capabilities with time. That's good. In terms of like the actual meaning of what's included in SKAN 5, so again, it's not fully live yet, so we know when it's actually live, but they provide a bit of a teaser, right? Like a bit more details on what's included. And we already know that it's not a massive change like happened with SKAN 4. It's more of like the minor changes that we also saw in the past with previous version upgrades of SKAN. And this particular version, what they've announced is there's basically one major additional feature, which is support for re-engagement measurement. And what I mean by that is, until now, SKAN only supported app install campaigns. So a user could see an ad for an app, if they click it, and if the advertised app doesn't exist in the user device yet, then they would be able to download the app, open it, and a SKAN postback would be sent. But if the user already had the app installed, for example, if it's a retargeting ad or just an ad showing for an existing user, then no SKAN would happen. Basically, the user, even if the user clicked the ad and got directly to the app, there wouldn't be any SKAN postback generated. You wouldn't even know that it happened, right? And that was kind of a limitation for SKAN. SKAN didn't work with re-engagement. So in SKAN 5, suddenly they would be able to support that measurement for existing users. So even if a user who already has the app sees an ad, clicks it, and gets directly to the app, a SKAN postback would be generated and sent to the networks. And you would know that it's a re-engagement measurement. So that would provide the ability for, for example, for any advertisers who have a large user base or have any retargeting or re-engagement campaigns to start seeing measurement for these campaigns as well, which I think is a great feature. Again, we'll see exactly all the details once it would be fully live. But it will be kind of another, I guess maybe a smarter impact than SKAN 4 was, but still a really meaningful one for some of these advertisers.
We're kind of getting to the end of the session now, Eran, but one of the questions I guess I'd be interested to ask you, because I guess you're in a somewhat unique position, is what would you like features-wise to come in SKAN 6, 7, whatever the future might bring? If you had that kind of control over the development roadmap, what would you like to see included?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, it's interesting. Like before SKAN 5 was announced, I actually said that re-engagement is one of the, after SKAN 4 was announced, I said, okay, like they covered a lot of ground, but we're missing re-engagement. I was very happy to hear about SKAN 5 because we do have large customers who work with like massive advertisers there, or have large customer bases, and they weren't getting any SKAN postbacks because many of the users already had the app. So I think that was a good advancement. If I'm trying to think about the future, what else can they, what can Apple do to really help there is, I think there's still more room in providing, I guess, like a more granular signal kind of with time. The thing is, it's always a trade-off, but I think, again, it's right now already with the 3 postbacks, the longer windows, and those additional types of conversion values, it provides kind of additional thing, but Apple knows it's a trade-off. So they added some more complexity on how much information you can get from those signals. So for example, the longer postback, as I mentioned, like for the 7th day and the 35th day, you're getting those 2 additional postbacks, but there's a bit of a caveat there. One is the randomness increases. I've mentioned some randomness I've introduced. So those postbacks would be sent between 1 and 6 days after that conversion value actually happened at the end of the window. So it's taking much longer for the postbacks to arrive. So on the one hand, great additional signal for the long cohorts, but it takes a long time until you're getting that information. It makes it really hard to know what's the actual time range or time period where the actual event that you did, like running that campaign. I think maybe a bit more now, again, it's by design. The idea is to make sure that the user privacy is kept. But I think maybe a bit more advancements in kind of the trade-off, the ability to make the trade-off. Again, maybe for higher volume, for example, maybe reducing the random timer, right? Because it's much harder to understand the privacy of the users. Or again, maybe a different levels of those coarse values for higher volumes. So basically adding more granularity for high volume users, I think would be really impactful, even like after kind of SKAN 4. That I guess would be my next request by Apple if they're again listening to my webinars. Yeah,
I'm sure if we see it in SKAN 6, we'll be sure to give credit to you, Eran.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Eran, for a really insightful session. I've learned loads about SKAN. Hopefully, those that are kind of tuning in and listening to this do as well. Yeah, as always, please reach out to us. All of the content is shared on YouTube and on LinkedIn. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to Eran or myself. And again, big thanks to Eran. And yeah, thank you for everyone for watching.